So let's catch up with what's coming at the forefront of the 40k narrative going forward, what are Vashtorr's goals when assaulting the Pariah Nexus, and how are the other factions of 40k getting involved. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today I thought I'd take a video to catch up on the latest development in the forefront of Games Workshop's latest Warhammer 40k main storyline. Over the past 18 months or so, Games Workshop have been developing Vashtorr's narrative as he makes his path toward godhood. It started in Arks of Omen, and then there were some interesting developments around the entire Pariah Nexus setting in the Crusade Pariah Nexus book. And now in a couple of the latest White Dwarfs, there have been some interesting developments and expanding on exactly what's happening there. They would still say that it's clarifying the starting phases of the next conflict, as opposed to getting to grips with the bulk of the actual battles themselves. Still though, I thought there were some really interesting little lore teasers, and particularly little snippets about how the other factions are reacting and battling with us in the same sector, and it does sound like the main storyline of Vashtorr, Cawl, and the Silent King has progressed slightly, if only by a little bit. To recap what's happened so far, the latest big lore sequence from Warhammer 40k was Games Workshop's whole Arks of Omen campaign series. That was the concluding campaign to 9th edition. Vashtorr teams up with Abaddon the Despoiler, and they set out together to try and obtain some weapons of galaxy-changing proportions. Abaddon because he wants to use them against the Imperium to win the war once and for all. Vashtorr because he believes that galaxy-changing technological destruction like that will make him ascend to the Chaos Pantheon and be a full-on Chaos deity of machines and crafting, and be on equal footing with the other Chaos gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle. To that end, he forged a whole bunch of Space Hulks into the Arks of Omen, sent them out with a whole bunch of Chaos Space Marine commanders, and they were used to basically reassemble the Dark Angel's homeworld of Caliban, now reforged into the demon world of Wormwood, and unite some ancient technology that turned it into a great webway tunneling machine, the last bit of which was the Dark Angel's ancient and sentient navigation system of the Tutulture that was being used to navigate the rock around the galaxy. Luring them into a trap, it was only thanks to the intervention of Lionel Johnson that the Dark Angels and Blood Angels elites escaped the surface of Wormwood at all. That essentially ended with Chaos victorious though, and he sets off into the void, presumably to try and find this vault of weapons. In what started as an unrelated narrative, there's the entire storyline as to the Necrons and their Pariah Nexus, Zarek the Silent King reawakening his legions and establishing a great nodal matrix called the Pariah Nexus, an area of space that's cut off from the warp, basically repressing any chaos within and also causing any of the non-Necron sentient races with actual souls and things to basically wither and die. The Silent King also wanting to use it as an experimenting ground to try and reverse the Necrons' biotransference, where they got changed into their metal bodies. Splinter fleets from Guilliman's Indomitus crusade crashed into the expanding anomaly, and were instantly met with far more force than they bargained for, going up against the might of the Silent King's legions, their offensive grinding to a halt, and the warp dampening both made it hard for them to form any sort of retreat from the Nexus, or also signal for aid. When they did eventually get word out, Belisarius, Cawl, and the Abmech were the first ones to answer the distress summons, setting off with an enormous fleet of forge vessels, partly to do a bit of fighting against the Necrons, though really the Abmech's main goal was to harness and harvest vast quantities of Blackstone, using a slight variation of the same Necron technology with the thing to basically have ships that can dampen the warp and potentially do things like travel safely through warp storms, something that's of utmost importance to the Imperium of Man, given that half of it is cut off by the Great Rift and kind of inaccessible bar a few key passageways. The Abmech reinforced the Imperial holdings and caused great damage to the Necrons, though still broadly the Necrons have more might and power within the sector. The Silent King only begins to be really challenged when Imhotep the Stormlord arrives to the Nexus in force and starts to take planets, seeking to establish himself once and for all as the true ruler of the Necron race, with all the power that he's consolidated since Awakening. The war escalates with both the Tech Priest and the Silent King deploying ancient superweapons, all sorts of weird, exotic and disturbing technology, the Abmechs drawn from the Age of Darkness, and the Silent King from the weapons of the Technomandrites, horrific planet-destroying weapons, in all sorts of different forms that are forbidden by both the humans and the Necrons alike. The carnage causes massive collateral damage to both sides, and both the Abmech and the Silent King lose a lot of trust of their allies, several dynasties deserting the Silent King to pitch in with the Stormlord as a result of the Triarch's incursion and not adhering to the codes of combat. The Pariah Nexus Crusade book basically ends with Vashtorr arriving into the Nexus. He's unleashed after an Abmech Magos Myrmidominus Gelf unleashes a super weapon in the Scarran system. pushed to desperation when an enormous Necron fleet arises that they have no hope to defeat otherwise, and he deploys a microservitor satellite network named Shipwrecked Constellation, a great big spacebound energy weapon that he doesn't truly fully comprehend the inner workings of, and this energy weapon pivots and turns, blasting apart different ships on both sides, causing more damage to the Necrons than the Imperium, though not by much, before the entire network exploding in a great vortex of energy. And it seems that the tech heresy being deployed is enough to summon Vashtorr, the great big demon engine, web-borrowing world of Wormwood emerging into real space. Vashtorr looking down at the war in the Pariah Nexus with favour, the technological horrors deployed by the Admech and the Necrons on both sides, basically being the very thing that strengthens him. There's a few more details as to his forces. As we know, Wormwood bores holes through the webway and the fabric of reality itself, so a bit of a different mode of travel to warp travel, and arguably more powerful, as it can be used to reach areas of the webway that you might not be able to normally, or create new sections in itself if it wants to. Travelling in its wake are a great many Chaos Craft and demons, most of them allied to Vashtorr, though many of them just opportunists, travelling with the planet engine, though it seems that in its normal travel mode it doesn't create new webway just in itself, as it says that the tunnels bored by it collapse in its passing, so it's more like a new and overpowered form of travel to get around the galaxy. On arrival to the Scarran system, the remains of the Admech fleet and Necron fleet are dwarfed by the Chaos emerging forces, particularly after that great superweapon took a big toll on both. Vashtorr's forces fall upon the enemy in great numbers, slaying or scattering them, and Vashtorr uses his artifice to turn his attention to the Scarran system's Blackstone pylon, basically flipping the Blackstone's polarity. It can be used to either amplify or inhibit the forces of Chaos, and apparently when you're a Chaos god of mechanisms, you can quite handily turn it round. So this one, instead of being something to reinforce the whole nodal network and stop Chaos from manifesting there, this one's now a great big beacon of Chaos. That was more or less where the narrative of the Pariah Nexus Crusade book left off, though it looks like there has been a bit of an expansion as to what Vashtorr's situation is in the White Dwarf articles, a little bit more about his forces and his intentions, and plenty of the other chaos operating within the Nexus, some of which are for or against the Archivane. There's only really a few snippets as to what his overall aim is in terms of attacking the Pariah Nexus, which maybe seems like a bit of an unusual move, attacking the Necrons at a great big position of strength in a place where the powers of chaos are much reduced, though there are a few hints. He describes that he has great works to undertake in this region of the galaxy, and then in the White Dwarf there's a couple of more snippets making more explicit that his intent is to locate and unseal something that he refers to as the Vault, so it does indeed look like his eyes are still on the prize trying to find his super weapons. There's also an interesting little sentence saying that many believe that unmaking the Necron's nodal matrix may reveal clues to the fated lock to which Wormwood is the key. That one's kind of interesting in itself, implying that Vashtorr himself doesn't know exactly where this vault is, and not only does he need to go and open it, but he also needs to find the location. Seems like his fetch quest treasure hunt doesn't seem to be getting massively closer to completion. I guess if he's going after the Pariah Nexus though, it might imply that the weapon that he's looking for has maybe been sealed away since the whole War in Heaven thing, with the Necrons versus the Old Ones, with the Eldar perhaps involved as well. I've seen at least some fun speculation online that it could be something to do with the outside of Catan for the Necrons, but maybe that's a bit of an outside guess. I'm not really sure if you'd consider a rival deity as a technological weapon of any sort, but certainly felt like a fun theory. Otherwise, the White Dwarf expands on the force of Vashtorr just a little bit. It seems that for this conflict, Abaddon the Despoiler has not deigned to join him in the Pariah Nexus. Instead, he's being accompanied by a warband known as the Soul Eaters, a splinter force of the Black Legion led by a Lord Drakes, apparently one of Abaddon the Despoiler's inner circle. I'm not sure if he has ever been mentioned by name before or if he's just a new character. In any case, by Vashtorr's calculations, he considers Wormwood to be unassailable in its raw strength within the Nexus. He isn't currently worried about the Necrons or the Imperium having enough strength to actually take it out or destroy it, and has kept the Demon Forge world essentially anchored around the Scarran system alongside that corrupted Blackstone beacon, and is using it as a base of operations to try and establish his presence within the Pariah Nexus, carving out an area of space under the control of Chaos. Wormwood's joined by a great number of hangers-on and allied Chaos warbands as well. It was kind of interesting that there were specifically Dark Mechanicum Covens called out specifically that are supporting him. Dark Mechanicum does really seem like the force that Vashtorr would really be the head of and associated with, but we haven't really heard too much of them called out specifically in the lore surrounding him. It's more talky of generic demon engines and kind of non-specific demon aids. I guess partly because they're not really a 40k faction out there at the moment, so maybe aren't put in the limelight. Given that Vashtorr's about though, it certainly seems possible they might be a thing at some point in the future. Otherwise though, they give us some details as to other chaos within the Nexus. Apparently word bearers have made some inroads into conquering some worlds within the Nexus themselves. A dark apostle known as Zakis Armon basically took advantage of the societal breakdown brought on by the Stilling to deliver a world called Caliphate to the Dark Gods. Vashtorr's extended an offer of allegiance to them to further cement his power, and they're battling Imhotep and his Sotek dynasty. Fabius Bile's about, though it sounds like he's mainly keeping to himself and just doing his normal thing, raiding and taking things opportunistically. He's allied himself to the Slanesh-orientated Flawless Host, and they fell upon the embattled chapter planet of a Space Marine chapter called the Gilded Suns, and basically destroyed the chapter and took their gene seed for his experimentation. As I talked about in a recent video, one of the most intriguing teasers was that for the Thousand Suns, Magnus and his sorcerers ultimately believe that the will of Tzeentch is that Vashtorr does not ascend to a full-fledged Chaos deity, and have moved to establish a presence within the Pariah Nexus, potentially with thoughts to trying to stop him if possible. The snippet about them was focused on them building and developing some battle automata, as they can't really operate properly within the Pariah Nexus due to the warp dampening effects that it has, which perhaps has a greater effect on them than virtually any other force out there in 40k, given how reliant they are on their psychic powers. It sounds like these battle automata are improved from the Heresy era battle automata like the Castellax ones that they had, but it's implied that they're making some fairly heavy-handed and ridiculous improvements to them with demon, organic, and blackstone components to them, plus harvesting a whole load of AdMech automata technology. And it certainly feels like it's implying a new unit for the Thousand Suns in the actual game of 40k at some point. I feel like it could be an interesting time when their codex drops. I must admit though, if they're going to try and thwart Vashtorr, I'm not sure that taking a whole load of tech heresy abominations to try and fight him with is going to be the most sensible move. That feels like the arena that he's got the biggest control over, so I'm not sure if their prophecies are being set a little bit short-sighted there. Otherwise though, maybe slightly peripheral to the story, most of the other races of 40k are involved in the Pariah Nexus in one way or another. Kyria Draxus is still there, and there's a sequence in that Pariah Nexus book when she blows up a Noctilith beacon. White Dwarf has had a fun boarding action style story over the last few issues, pitting a Necron Chronomancer against a Tech Priest with a potent time weapon. An Orc War has been rampaging through the Pariah Nexus, but gradually been falling apart as the Stilling seems to basically undermine the Orc's central purpose of fighting a great big battle under a great war boss, and they more fall to infighting. Though it seems that the ingenuity of the Orc mechs is working to counteract that. They've looted some great big Blackstone beacons and made it positively charged to try and restore the fighting spirit of their nearby Orcs, and this seems to be doing well for the core of their war. They've also been enjoying the looting that they can do with the vast amount of technology on offer. Otherwise, the Elator Eldar are present in the region, trying to undermine the Necrons wherever they can, hopefully trying to deepen the war between the Stormlord and the Silent King to cause as much carnage as possible, though the Eldar aren't usually affected by the Nexus. The Leagues of Vosav turned up and are basically trying to get their hands on the resource that everyone wants in the Blackstone, and while the Drukhari can't get much sustenance from these stilled populations being sort of insensate to pain, though it has left the Homuncular Covens and a massive amount of biological material with which to make their flesh creations from stilled populations that are unable to fight back. Finally though, between the Crusade book and the White Dwarfs, they have maybe set the scene for the next escalation in the conflict. Kind of a shame that we haven't really heard too much about Vashtorr's actual battles against the other forces so far, though I guess that's still to come. Belisarius calls liminal abrasors to dampen the warp being coming online that have been taking time to develop. Will be interesting to see how the Imperium manages to deploy those and what sort of impact they have. And it sounds like Rabute Gilliman himself is turning his attention to the Pariah Nexus, setting off there at the head of Battle Group Primus of the Indomitus Crusade, the Imperium trying to end this conflict with a victory once and for all. Sounds like there could be a great number of really big important characters all fighting within the same area of space, Gilliman, Vashtorr and the Silent King all going head to head. Otherwise, for his part, the Silent King's position is becoming more overstretched. He's still got the biggest and most powerful forces within the Nexus, given that he's basically fighting on home turf, but he has been fighting a war on two fronts against Imhotep the Stormlord and the Imperium, and now Chaos have been thrown into the mix. There's a snippet in the White Dwarf that says that he sees Vashtorr and Wormwood as the single greatest threats to the Nephilim Anomalies expansion, and as a result he's got those Necron Technomandrite scientists working on a way to unmake the world of Wormwood. I feel like Games Workshop does quite like using that unmake word to describe how you destroy things. Again, like the Thousand Suns though, I'm not sure that deploying some sort of technological superweapon against Vashtorr is going to end quite as well as he hopes it might. In any case, I do find it interesting to see where the primary 40k narrative is going next. It does feel like that entire Pariah Nexus conflict is sort of drawing together a lot of the threads of what they did both at the start of 9th edition and at the end of it. I'm not sure how they're going to further expand on the whole thing. I'm still perhaps most interested to find out exactly what kind of heretical superweapon Vashtorr is going to try and unleash on the galaxy. I feel like that's the biggest thing that Games Workshop's teasing now. Not sure if that's going to wind up being another focus of a big campaign at the end of the edition, much with Arks of Omen. I feel like the more that Vashtorr is in the focus, the more chance we have of getting a Dark Mechanicum army actually coming out in its own right, though I've got no idea whether that will be in 10th edition or further down the line. In any case, let me know your thoughts as to a few more teasers as to conflicts to come and things. Look forward to hearing what you guys think might be coming next. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I do tend to keep up with Games Workshop's news and releases, usually more focusing on gameplay and models and things, though I do like to dip into the lore from time to time when I get interested. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.